Hi, today is Monday, May 20th, 2019, and welcome to My PCD Life. So, a lot going on at ATS today. I got to interview a lot of the doctors. Well, not a lot of the doctors, there's so many PCD doctors, but a few of the PCD doctors. So, I'm just going to give this introduction and hope you enjoy hearing what they have to say, meeting some of the different faces. Working with PCD. In PCD.
So I started in PCD about 12 years ago when I was lucky enough to be a trainee at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I had my mentors, Leigh and Mike Knowles and Stephanie Davis. And I really liked PCD because it was a brand new disease that really people didn't know about. And I felt we could make a big impact with the patients we had and in the community in general by trying to uncover some of the secrets that this disease holds. And the other reason I got so involved is I've never seen a patient group as motivated and dedicated to a disease as this, and together I thought we could make a big difference. So the science is fascinating, the patients are motivated, and I'm hoping we can really revolutionize how this progresses over time. So that's why I got involved. So I actually help set up clinical centers in the PCD Foundation Clinical and Research Center Network. So I teach doctors how to use the nasal nitric oxide devices, how to interpret ciliary biopsies, and making sure they have all of the ancillary and necessary support to run an effective site. And so we train them, and then we go and certify them as sites that can definitely perform a proper PCD diagnosis.
So I'm here with Dr. Hyman Omran from Germany, and Dr. Omran specializes in pediatric pulmonology. And if you could tell us a little bit about what your research in PCD and how you became interested in PCD.
Yeah, hi Mary. So actually I started to do research on primary ciliary dyskinesia in the end of the 90s. I was initially doing research on rare ciliopathies like kidney disease, liver disease, and other stuff in my PhD. And I actually found a patient, and this was in the midst of the 90s, where I found a patient with situs inversus and cough. And at that time, I remembered that during medical training that there is a disease referred to as Cartagena syndrome. And we tried to make the diagnosis, establish the diagnosis, and we found out that there were not actually at that time any diagnostic means. So people were not used to take nasal brush or rhinoscope biopsies. People were not able to do electron microscopy properly. So I decided to start my own research on PCD. We actually used this family later because there were 4 affected individuals. The patients were coming from Lebanon. We identified the gene locus for DNH5, published this in 2000, identified the major gene defect in 2002 for DNH5 with DNH5 mutations, and subsequently identified more than 40 genetic defects causing motile ciliopathies and primary ciliary dyskinesia. And we are very much interested to understanding the basic biology of the disease in order to aid diagnosis by means of introducing immunofluorescence microscopy techniques to improve high-speed video microscopy, and especially to introduce genetic testing for primary ciliary dyskinesia. And then more recently we moved more into the clinical trial field, and we actually were very fortunate that the European Union rewarded us with a grant to do the first placebo-controlled randomized trial for PCD, investigating the effect of azithromycin. So this will very soon come out, and we will show that this will actually help the patients to get the first medication that is actually then evidence-based medicine and not only eminence-based medicine.
All right, thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about how you've worked with the PCD Foundation, and both in Germany and in the US?
Yeah. So actually in the 90s we started in Germany with a PCD support group, and we had annual meetings where we tried to improve diagnostics and therapeutic challenges facing PCD. And during that time, actually in the early new century, I actually met Michel Mannion, and we actually started to think about how to face those problems in PCD, and we decided that we join more cross-continental forces. So we had actually a grant that was also funded by the European Community, where we actually American representatives met with German representatives and other European representatives, and we tried to come up with ideas to improve therapeutics and diagnostics challenges in order to meet. That's the reason why I'm now actually for many years now also in the scientific advisory board at the US PCD Foundation, not only in the European ones, and we are now meeting very frequently to look for clinical trials where we can actually join forces, where US, American and European centers both are actually collaborating with each other.
I'm here with Dr. Margaret Leigh with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And Dr. Leigh, can you tell us how you got involved with PCD research?
I think it all started with a patient that I diagnosed when I was in my second year of fellowship, and followed her throughout all of her childhood into adulthood. And anytime we had a question about PCD, we would call the family and they would bring her and participate in any of the little studies that we were starting to do, mostly comparing PCD to CF at that time. And I was just fascinated by thinking about the differences and similarities with cystic fibrosis, and that's what launched our research.
UNC was one of the first PCD centers, and your work with the foundation, you actually do site visits to help accreditate and keep accredited PCD centers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is actually a lot of fun to go to different centers, see how they have things set up, meet the doctors and their whole support team, and it's interesting in that each place has its own strengths. Mostly it's the people that are involved that are particularly special people. And I've had a lot of fun going and seeing the different centers around the country.
I'm here with Dr. Michael Knowles at UNC Chapel Hill. And you've heard Dr. Knowles mentioned by a few other doctors that have been interviewed. So he's sort of the place where everybody seems to start with PCD. So Dr. Knowles, can you tell us how you got your start and your interest with primary ciliary dyskinesia?
It's interesting because I first got started with another rare disease called cystic fibrosis in 1978 when I was learning to do my research training. And while we were studying cystic fibrosis, we figured out that the mucus got thick in the airways and mucociliary clearance failed. As we moved through studies on cystic fibrosis, it occurred to us that people who have defective ciliary function have defective mucociliary clearance. And we thought it would be interesting to extend studies into primary ciliary dyskinesia, and then we'd be able to compare what cystic fibrosis is like versus what PCD is like. And of course, anytime you get interested in a new disease process and you do lots of early experiments, and then you start doing genetic research, and then you start doing a whole variety of biological research, and of course all this is with patients who are suffering with the challenges of a chronic airways disease. You get more enmeshed in a whole variety of things. So that's the short version of how I got interested and involved in PCD.
Can you tell us what's on the horizon for research in PCD?
The horizon for research in PCD looks very bright. We have had an enormously successful progress over the last 30 years, and that puts us in a place now where we have a good understanding of the genetics, the pathogenesis, the cause of how the dysfunctional cilia lead to disease, the clinical manifestations with the lung and other manifestations. And we now know enough so that we can actually start about doing therapeutic trials. There have already been a couple of therapeutic trials undertaken which really address inflammation in the airway and the ability to liquefy secretion so they can be coughed up better. But I think what the horizon is showing us is we can actually talk about modifying or correcting the defective cilia gene product to help make the cilia move again. There are exciting discussions. In fact, we're getting ready to go into a session right now where people are going to be talking about doing correction of primary ciliary dyskinesia, cellular function in cultures of cells from PCD patients. And I think it's not inconceivable one could think about looking at clinical trials in that kind of venue in another decade. Another decade seems like a long time. On the other hand, there's been enormous progress in the last 30 years, which to PCD patients isn't very fast, but in terms of biomedical research, it's a very rapid pace. There's an enormous interest in here. And I'll go back to my original rare disease, cystic fibrosis. We have seen enormous strides in therapeutic approaches in cystic fibrosis. And believe it or not, some of those same principles in therapeutic development aspects also apply to PCD. So PCD has benefited from the rare disease I started off with cystic fibrosis. But I want to tell the people who are dealing with PCD, I am a researcher and I am incredibly invested in PCD. It's exciting scientifically. It's exciting to deal with people who are coping with chronic disease. In fact, I am fond of saying that people who have PCD are my heroes because you're doing the heavy lifting, you're doing the work every day. You don't get to take a day off from your disease. And when I get out of bed in the morning, I think about what you're doing, and it's easy to get inspired to continue the work that we've been doing so far. Thank you.
That's a wrap for today. I hope to have a lot more interviews for you tomorrow. Thank you for watching this episode of My PCD Life.